Okay, I'd like to transition then to our next panel, which will be led by Tiffany Wilson on getting more women into the boardroom. Tiffany.
Thanks, Jason, and it's great to see all of you, lots of familiar faces and names. So I'm Tiffany Wilson. I am the president and CEO of the University City Science Center based in Philadelphia. I've met most of you through my career in Atlanta, building GCMI, MedTech Women, which is now Women at Southeast Life Sciences. So it's this group is near and dear to my heart, and I think that we've got an important topic to explain, to talk about today. So really, you know, how do we start to see more women on boards? How do you find those roles? What are the qualifications? What are the challenges and hurdles? And how can we as a community be more mindful as we continue to build out the Southeast Life Sciences ecosystem to provide more and more opportunities for women, not only in the C-suite, but in more board activity? It was said on the last talk, which was amazing. So thanks so much for that. That diversity matters, and it matters to the bottom line, and it matters to the products and services that we consume in the healthcare environment. So I want to kick things off. We've got an amazing group of leaders here with vast board experience. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go forward, and I'll keep an eye out for those and pull those. But I'll ask kind of each of you to give a brief overview of your background, and then kind of for context, share a little bit about your board experience, and we'll go from there. So Valerie, you want to start, kick things off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie Darling. I'm currently the CEO of Life Sciences Management Consultants. I work with presidents, CEOs, and founders on their commercial strategies and building, leading, and scaling commercial organizations. And I've done that traditionally in my career. I build, lead, and scale commercial organizations for Fortune 100 companies, and then several startups, which are my real passion. I was one of the 4 originals that started the commercial division of Genzyme, Zymogenetics, and Opgen in all specialty arenas. My board organizations, I've been on board strategic advisory boards for several life science and technology companies, including digital tech and venture. And I have been on a nonprofit as well, which is near and dear to my heart, for bereaved children, because I'm a widow and had grieving children myself. But I am also an advisor, very, very happily, to the first Black corporate board readiness program in the United States, which is in Silicon Valley Executive Center with Santa Clara University, and also their Women's Corporate Board Readiness Program, which I'm certified in as well. And then I'm a member of several diverse board organizations, including being on the executive leadership team and the board, as well as DEI committee and chair of membership for the Private Directors Association, which works with private companies, which now, as you probably know, the pendulum has swung to private companies. So very interested in board organizations, interested in helping anyone out, and I look forward to this discussion with great friends.
Great, thanks, Valerie. Arlene, let's hear from you.
Hi, I started my career, I've always been in healthcare. I started my career at J&J in the pharmaceutical industry, and then I transitioned to work in biotech companies in business development, commercialization, and I've been the CEO of both a private and a public company. Public company I took public, it was a private company. I was very fortunate that I had a board of 4 women out of 5 board members who were female VCs at the time that I became a CEO. I think that was really important, not only to me getting the job, honestly, but also to my ultimate success, because they were extremely helpful to me. I've been on about 10 to 12 boards, something like that, public and private. Right now I'm on 4 public company boards, and I am an emeritus for MUSC. I was the chair there for the FRD for a few years, but I've been on that for quite some time, since I moved from California to Charleston. Been involved in 2 reverse mergers in the last year where we combined 2 companies, and I stayed on the board to kind of help see through the transition. And now I'm attached to the CEO and the other board members. And so now I'm working with them to do that. I think there is a great need for additional women and diversity in general on boards. I do think it adds a lot, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about that today, because it is a passion of mine. And it sounds easy, but it's not.
Great, thank you so much. Tara.
Yes, so happy to be here and amongst these amazing women, holy cow. So thanks for not leading with me. I am Tara Kochis-Stach and the president of Slone Partners. We're a national executive search firm, and we specialize in broadly life sciences companies, helping them at their growth stage. And so it could be at a Series A, Series B, or about to go public. And so naturally, then as a part of that growth, we conduct board searches. And so with some of the recent attention to diversity on boards, both in California and NASDAQ and everywhere else in between, you can imagine also that the demand for diversity and the need for search firms or deeper networks to accomplish what is needed and asked for to round out these boards with more diversity. We've been busier in that area than in past years, so which of course we welcome. And so it's been a pleasure as an organization focused in search, focused specifically in life sciences, to be a part of adding to and contributing to thinking about and all the things that come with that diversity to life science companies, particularly in the boardroom. And so that's part of what we do. And some of the organizations that were talked about in the opening keynote that support women on boards, whether they're life science focused or not, are partners of ours, as well as some of the organizations that Valerie's a part of, and et cetera. And so all of these, sort of this web, including recruiters of organizations, is a part of our world too, and necessary. So looking forward to the discussion. Personally, I am part of an amazing organization here. We have a diverse board, and it adds to our value, it adds to our thinking, it adds to the complexity by which how we view our company and stretches our thinking. And so it's been something that we've really enjoyed having as an organization. Additionally, that experience has allowed me to sit on 2 boards. So I sit on a nonprofit board as well as a springboard company. So, so anyway, really excited to be a part of this discussion, and we'll give it back to Tiffany. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Wow, you guys are amazing. So let's jump in with just from an industry perspective, based on what you've seen and experienced. Obviously, we're in life sciences, healthcare, med tech. Do you feel that women are more underrepresented in our industry versus other industries? What are you seeing there?
Well, I don't have I don't have precise numbers, but I do think that biotech in general is doing quite well. Pharma has done well over the last few years, but there is a tremendous amount of room for improvement. And sometimes on boards, people get on boards and they're there 20 years later. Mm-hmm. And that lack of turnover and that friendship between people on the board, and particularly the board with management, there's a comfort level that makes a board like that very difficult. When you're kind of repopulating a board, which I've been involved in for the last year with 2 companies that we did a reverse merger, the investors have been very insistent on having representation of women and minorities and a diverse board. And it's easier to do that when you have board seats that are open. Last year, I added about 5 people to the board outside directors for MUSC. And I really approached it more like a recruiter. We couldn't afford a recruiter, so I've worked with so many of them, I kind of mimicked their technique, but I really looked outside of my network. So I started with my network, looked outside of my network, worked with people that were on the nominating committee about what we really needed, and we were able to add more women to the board at MUSC FRD. Most of the women that we had were from MUSC and not from not the external directors, the independent directors. So I think it has to be out there and visible and discussed often, and there has to be board rotation. Without board rotation, or adding to the size of the board sometimes, and we can all discuss whether that's a good idea or not. I think it's important. I think that, and my last comment is, I actually started on my first public company board with a Japanese company, which when I look back at the time I did that, I can't believe that, but that happened because of networking and relationships and a particular skill set that I brought, and the fact that I've been doing business in Japan for a long time. And then the next board I was added to was in France because they had a mandate to add women and they couldn't find anyone who had been a CEO. So I got a board seat kind of by default, and then everything moved forward from there.
I'd be really eager to hear Tara's comments on this, but my feeling is that, and I've heard stats, and I think McKinsey also has these, but in life sciences, we tend to have lower numbers of women on boards than even other industries. And up until maybe last year specifically. And what I see to Arlene's point, is that the boards don't seem to change very often, right? Some of them don't have such, they don't have short-term limits. But you see the women that do get on boards that are on 4 or 5 or 6 boards. So it's the same people sometimes on those boards. But I think in California, things have changed as a result of Senate Bill 826. So now more women have been added to boards in the past year, and certainly will be this year when the end of 2021 edict falls, right? Deadline hits. So I think that is impacting women in life sciences in the Southeast. I think we talk about in the Southeast in particular, it's more difficult for a woman because the California boards, you're seeing a lot of recruiting go on in California. They're pulling other board members from other places they're already sitting on a board as well for those boards, right, Tara? But you see a lot of California recruiters particularly adding women that they know from their network from California. So outreach to the Southeast tends to be a little bit more difficult for us in the Southeast. Sure. Would you say that's, Tara? I defer to you're the professional, so.
Yeah, I think, there are a couple of things, in terms of where my thoughts are taking me around what's been said, but the way to think about this might be that this is something that's getting talked about everywhere, right? And so there's strength in diversity, there's strength in diverse thought, there's strength in diverse, perspectives of all kinds. And so I think that's been proven, not just in life sciences, but broadly in business and organizations everywhere. And so I think anytime you bring attention to something, or intentionally track it or look at it, the metrics are going to increase and be more visible. People are going to pay attention to it. So there's some intentionality that I think is happening everywhere. And life science is not immune to, some of the traditions that happened in the 90s and 2000s where, board members were really thought of as the operators of other companies, and most of those just happen to be white men. And so the tide is shifting as there are more opportunities for women and people of all walks of life to lead organizations, to be funded. And so I think we are absolutely seeing a tide shift in that direction, in a positive direction. Medical school applications are nearly equal in terms of gender between male and female, and that will greatly impact the pool going forward. So I think it's heading in the right direction, as we illuminate more opportunities and take a look at things. So, you know, the other piece of that is if you look at Fortune 500 companies, historically, you know, very few people of color in that category, right? And so I think today there's 4 Black women as a part of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies broadly. And so when you think about everyone looking at the pool of candidates in terms of where to draw from, you know, we've got some work to do in terms of where people go, but the tide is, and the tide is shifting. And so anyway, I said a lot there. Overall, we're bullish about the direction we're heading. There's still, you know, a lot of work to be done. Deerfield, just to cite some other data, Deerfield, which is a VC group specializing in life sciences, polled 140 companies and where they had received investments of 25 million or more, and looked at the senior leadership and board representation within those companies. And so what they found was that nearly half of these companies did not have a single female board member. And so what that tells me is that we've got lots of opportunity to go. There's lots of opportunity for women on this, you know, on this call who are listening and thinking about their own career and their own, you know, desire to be on a board. There's, you know, there's a lot of activity and interest. And so, you know, the tide is shifting. We're not there yet.
Yeah, we're definitely not there yet. So if I'm thinking about board service, and maybe I'm not ready yet, but, you know, aspire to do that one day, how do I know when and if I'm qualified for board service? And that goes to, you know, all of you have served on not-for-profit boards and private company boards, publicly traded company boards. What are the differences? Where do I start? What do I need to be thinking about so I'm prepared?
Well, I'll start. I think that being on a nonprofit board is helpful, but when a public company especially is looking for a certain skill set, they're not looking so much, this is my current experience, not 5 years ago, it was very different. But my current experience is they're looking really for a skill set to add to the board. So for example, a CFO who can chair an audit committee, or someone who has, I typically get, people are interested because I have been a CEO and because I've chaired a lot of compensation committees. And if they're looking for that particular background, but in general, they're looking for skill sets. And I would say that then there's another group of boards where there's not a lot of turnover, that they are looking for someone that kind of looks like them in general. And I'm on a board right now where I am the only woman on the board with a lot of older white men. And I'm always pushing about topics of diversity, not just for the board, but in general. So you get a board seat, but then you have to have board influence. And that's the second step. I think that's really more difficult. So having a really solid skill base, something that you're really good at, and people recognize that you can contribute, is a good way to get a board seat, and also to have influence on the board where you can really contribute something. But right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of people that want to add women to boards are looking for somebody to put in the audit seat, a CFO, CPA, not a scientist.
Right.
I absolutely second what Arlene said. The number one recruited person is a CFO, right? Because they want audit committee potential. So a CFO and a CPA. I think when you look for a board seat, you really have to think about your time as well. If you are currently working, a public board can be 250 to 350 hours per year. So it's a lot of hours. And that's the 250 is an average. That's without any additional committee work. So you've got to look at what you can actually give to a board. And private companies can tend to be more intimate, where you're more intimately involved with strategy setting, where you're an advisor certainly, but you know, a public board, a large public board, for example. So I have many colleagues who are on large public boards, and they say they're a rubber stamp, and you certainly don't want to be a rubber stamp. Sometimes, as the only female in that on that public board, it's difficult to break in. As you mentioned, the board influence is really important. So sometimes, and you have to look at private boards as a way to possibly get into those big public boards, if indeed you want a big public board. And you've got to really look at your situation, because I think sometimes if you have a board portfolio, a large public board would be great. Other times, if you are, you know, the CEO currently of a company or an SVP, sometimes that may not be what you want for your lifestyle.
Yeah, I think what we see between, just hovering here for a minute, between public and private boards is to Arlene's point, a public company board is really tapping into your skill set, what you've done in your career, and being able to bring that influence into the board, either through committee or other work. It could be about succession planning. It could be about corporate strategy. It could be about executive compensation, right? These are bigger topics. In our private company boards, where we've got growing organizations, the board, especially if it's the first independent board member outside of the investor group and those kinds of things, it could be more about mentoring and coaching the CEO, or, you know, developing some commercial avenues. And to Valerie's point, more hands-on, more intimate, you know, maybe more time in shorter increments versus the intensity of a board meeting, and where you're preparing, looking at the board deck, going to dinner, having the meeting, committee meetings, and then flying out. So it's fairly intense for a short period of time, versus a private company board tends to be, you know, in shorter spurts throughout. And it really is all about the skills that you bring. Where we've seen a scientific career shine in a private company board is around strategy, or applications and science and partnerships. So, you know, it's not without some business acumen or ability to think about, you know, relationships, introductions, or deals at some level. You know, but that's where we've seen somebody who might be a VP of some, you know, some kind of scientific area. Otherwise, most of the board, you know, needs tend to be in the business functions of, you know, operations, general management, CEO, CFO. Information technology is more outside of life sciences, but there is a cybersecurity and data security component that's getting a lot of interest in the news that you hear about, that's coming to life sciences in terms of, you know, a skill set that somebody could bring to the board. But those tend to be, you know, the biggest buckets, if you will, in terms of need or requests that we receive.
Just to add to that, I also think if you're known, if you want to get a board seat in a private company, and you know that there are groups like Blackstone or Deerfield or whatever, and you're in one of the hot biotech areas, I would suggest getting to know people in those organizations. That's how a lot of board seats happen. I'm just going through a couple of nominating processes right now, and as soon as somebody's name comes up from the recruiter that one of the people on the board knows, everybody's all over that name.
That's exactly right. You know, and I think it was talked about in Deanne's presentation in the beginning, you know, the networking piece is just so critical, and expanding beyond your network. And I think it was, you know, if we all looked at just our traditional pathways, it would fall short to, you know, the amazing connections that we could all have. And so oftentimes we hear that, like, oh, you know, it's really, you know, there's no opportunity for us to find this right person, this diversity candidate, because of this. And what we challenge ourselves with, as well as anyone we interact with, is to think about those pathways differently and to expand outside of your traditional network to find the people you're looking for. Because oftentimes they are there, it's just not visible by traditional means or the same way that we've always done it, because we have to do things differently today and going forward.
And I concur with what Tara's saying too. One of the reasons that so many people are joining diverse board organizations, for example, Him for Her is one, Board IQ, Board Prospects, Valence, some of these organizations that are for diverse candidates, and certainly, you know, advising diverse board readiness programs, is so that we can expand our networks to more diverse candidates as well. So you've got to go outside your traditional network, right? And start looking into those organizations that are full of diverse candidates, the highly competent executives that want to sit on boards as well. So looking beyond, and again, you know, unconscious bias.
Right. And putting it out there, right? Just talking to people. It's historically how many men have done it before, right? They go out or they just say, hey, I'm really interested in getting on a board. Can you help me? Right. And so, you know, being bold about what it is you want to do, your goals, and tapping into the resources and asking people for their support, not just, you know, thinking about that, but can you make an introduction to this person for me or on my behalf? And becoming an active participant in what it is you want to accomplish and how you want to get there, so that you create those opportunities for yourself.
How about, you know, some of the programs were mentioned previously, women on boards. I personally am a member of Women Business Leaders and have gone through their board training exercise. So does a formal certificate help at all? Should I be investing time in those types of activities as well? Is it meaningful in terms of getting those roles?
I don't personally, I don't think it is. I think it's about connections. I think it's about skill set. People are willing to take a chance for someone who hasn't been a board member before. But again, they have to have had some breadth of experience in the organization. And they have to be sitting in a seat that, you know, like being the audit chair, the comp chair, or someone who has a lot of deal experience or financing experience coming on the board. Those are much more helpful. I reached out to women on boards for this MUSC, 5 people that I had to find last year. And I got someone to head the finance committee from Women on Boards. I didn't know, someone who's actually in San Diego. I could not find anybody local in the Southeast. It's really sad that I had to bring somebody from San Diego to Charleston to do this. But I found the organization really helpful, and they gave me several resumes of people. I didn't care if they had a certificate. I was much more interested in what they had done and how they were going to fit with the board in terms of their skill set, but also their personality type as well. And none of the people that I put on the board have ever had any board experience before. I think that they fit what we needed, and I'm not sure a certificate would have swayed me at all.
Yeah. From a recruiting perspective, we see it adding value from a confidence builder, from a perspective of understanding board dynamics and those kinds of things. So you come, you know, with some of the dialogue or acronyms, you know, ahead of time, and it helps you address a board bio that looks appropriate, focus on results and accomplishments versus duties and things like that. So we see, you know, the representation becomes more clear. But to Arlene's point, you know, nothing says past board experience like a board experience. So, you know, jumping on and getting your first board experience, I think, is ideal. And we would, you know, from a recruiting perspective, and this might be, you know, sought with some controversy, but we would put nonprofit, even though I have a nonprofit in my background too, we would put nonprofit board experience in that same category. Is just different. It's good, and it's not going to take away, but it doesn't equate to, you know, the ability to sit on a board, or it doesn't mean board experience necessarily in life sciences, in a venture-backed company, in a public company, those kinds of things. So it's not a one-for-one trade-off.
And I also think that if you are joining a venture-backed company, a private company, and I've done this several times, I try to stay mostly now with public companies because that's where my experience is.
Mm-hmm.
But with private companies, you can expect, if you're the only non-VC on the board, to spend huge amounts of time, much more than a public company, because you'll be the only non-VC. They're adding you for a specific purpose. They want you to mentor the CEO. They want you to help with whatever it is that they need. But I think you can expect that a private company, as you're thinking about how much time you have to devote, can take a lot more time than a public company.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's on your way to the public company too, though, right? So that does tend to be an issue. With regard to the certificates or the training, I found, being on a board before I had it certainly gave me the experience that I wanted to get on other boards. But going through a certified program, a real certified program with a university, really prepares you for what you're going to be up against with a public board. So it does prepare you, and it's very, very current with some of the things that are going on now. And that's what I learned a lot about. I don't want to be on a SPAC board, for example. I learned that very clearly. But also being involved in these organizations where you do have a network of great board members. And Arlene, I would have loved to help you with that, because we could have gotten a lot of Southeast. PDA, for example, has 21 chapters, and there's lots in Atlanta, and there's lots in Florida. So being in those organizations, because networking is truly going to be the way you're going to get your board role, as Arlene said.
And I think in the Southeast, all of these things that we're talking about are really important. I came here from California,
yes,
and the infrastructure is still nascent compared to what I'm used to in Boston or San Francisco in terms of networking. And I'm glad to see that in the Southeast. I kind of semi-retired here to sit on boards, but I don't do any work in the Southeast. I go to other places for my work because there just hasn't been the opportunity to do that. So I'm glad that this organization is helping women that are living in the Southeast think about these things and make progress with their careers on the board side. I think it's very, very, very important.
I agree. And I think one of the things we can do, because we wanted to get together in this forum to talk about helping other women get on boards, right? I do believe, because the Southeast, well, I'll speak to Atlanta. Atlanta is not Boston. It's not San Francisco. It's not San Diego. It doesn't have the biotech hub name, right? Although we are known for technology, and we're known now for more med tech, of course, moving forward, but we don't have the same volume of venture, the same volume of companies. So I think it's really important, as we can help other women to populate those boards, whether they're here, but certainly outside, and why we're networking with groups. And I network with groups in Boston and San Francisco all the time, because that's where the opportunities are. I think if we can help other women get on boards, that would be great, to get more Southeasterners involved in these boards.
Allison asked a great question in the chat, following up Arlene's point about infrastructure. How can we as women at Southeast Life Sciences help change that by evolving the infrastructure? What do you feel is missing?
Well, just coming from biotech and pharma for many years, I think that it's an entirely linked ecosystem. And a lot of it relates to having money to start companies and money to move, especially to move companies forward. In healthcare, it's very expensive. We have some angel money here, but angel money doesn't get you very far. And these companies need to raise 30, 40, $50 million. And it's very difficult to get companies formed in the Southeast. And so that really ties directly into board opportunities for women, particularly being focused in the Southeast. So I think it's just kind of like building out the entire ecosystem around biotech companies and science, et cetera. For example, if you want to get a company financed in Charleston, you have to get money in Boston and you have to move everybody up there because there really aren't, the VCs don't want to come here. There aren't people, CMO type people, clinical people, et cetera, to staff these companies. They're mostly scientists, so they discover things, but they don't develop things. So it's a complicated story. And at the end of the day, it really ties into how many board seats are there in companies in the Southeast? And, you know, keeping your eyes peeled outside of this area, I think is also important.
Yeah.
It's critical. 40% of the venture money for life sciences is in Massachusetts, 45%, I think 42% is in California. So you've really got to network in those places, right?
There's not much money left over.
Yeah. And that's why we have the Senate bill that's been approved, right? With the $2 billion Senate bill, where the majority of it is coming to the Southeast and to the Southwest, because the acknowledgement of that venture, that we are underfunded in venture, yet technologically abundant, right? We know that's where that money should be coming to.
So there's some different themes here. You know, Arlene, you said something around kind of fit and kind of indicating personality and kind of finding that fit. You know, I've heard consistently now just the time commitments that you're signing up for, whether it's private or public. And so how do you go about, if I'm going to sign up to work, spend a lot of time, a lot of hours working with people that I may not know very well or at all, and I might be the only woman, how do I do my due diligence and assess whether, like, is this the right group? How do I know I'm not signing up for a nightmare of interpersonal interactions with dysfunction?
I think you have to interview with everybody on the board. I always tell everybody that. Don't just interview with the nominating committee, interview with everybody. Have 3 or 4 consistent questions that you ask everybody and make like about strategy or, you know, whatever's important for that company, and see how much overlap there is in the comment. And then I think when you're interviewing with the management team members, you want to interview with at least the named executive officers. And if there are conflicts going on the board, that's where you'll hear about them. If people aren't working well together, you won't hear it from the board. You'll probably hear it from the management team. And it really, you know, you can ask open-ended questions to find this out. But I think it's really important that you talk to a lot of people. And if it's a public company, going through all of their SEC documents, especially if you're going to be on the audit committee, is really important. And any, you know, ISS or Glass Lewis things that you can get your hands on. But depending on what your background is and what your role is, those are the things that you want to deal with. But it's also, the other thing I like to do is find if you were on a board and you were on another board with other people and I knew somebody there, I would probably call them and ask about the dynamics on the board that I'm thinking about joining. I've only been on one board where people were fighting, and I learned the hard way that you have to ask those really, really difficult questions and interview with a lot of people.
Yeah, you know, I think one of our superpowers as women, our spidey senses, right? And so I think, you know, by having enough of those conversations, collecting the hard data and insight, but then processing that, I don't know, it's always been a good rule of thumb for me that if I trust that my spidey senses, usually I'm not steered too far off base. And when I don't listen to them is usually when I regret not listening to them.
And wanting to get on a board so badly that you take any board is a big mistake.
Trust but verify.
Yeah, yeah. Wanting to be on a board and taking whatever comes to you is not a good idea, right? It can be a big mistake. And one of the things like spidey senses, Tiffany, that we do well as women is ask questions. And so even asking the question of each person on the board that you interview with, how did the board function during periods of great stress? How did you make decisions during COVID particularly? and asking that same question in that same manner, for example, of each board member, you'll get different answers.
Tara,
and then, like Arlene said, call someone that that knows those people on the board, right?
Yeah, Tara, do you look at it from a different perspective as a recruiter? I mean, you're signing up to engage on a client basis. Do you kind of go through that vetting process as well?
We do. And then we think about what the contributions are that this person has, like, not just their social superpower, but, what are they looking to contribute to this board? And so I think there's the, can I contribute or do what's necessary and what this board needs? Will I like doing those things, right? And then to what Valerie and Arlene have been talking about, will I be able to contribute to the culture of the board and to the company long term? Yeah. So, and really vetting that out. The decision-making questions are key, and looking for that consistency, and then checking the references and doing your diligence and not just taking something because it's there, is really, important part of the process. It has to be right on both sides. Right? So it doesn't work when it's not, but I wouldn't overlook the fact that, there's something that you want to be able to contribute, and, and making sure there's alignment there too, because this is, a place where you spend quite a bit of time with people for long stretches of time. And so you want to make sure that, it's a place where you feel reward as well as, understood or able to contribute. So, and the other thing too is thinking about, if you're the first female or diverse candidate, and thinking about, I'm really interested to hear more from Arlene on that, but, one of the things that we've been very excited about with some of the companies we're working with on their board seats for diversity is the idea of what it is you need this person to contribute, right? And so if you look at the expectations that have been in the past, and we decide, well, we're not going to look for the same thing we've always looked for, so therefore, what are we looking for? And and being able to really think about that question, and and be able to craft that storyline to say, like, this person has done these things and will be able to contribute in these ways. And there, now you're really creating diversity, right? Yeah. You're creating a different perspective or something new and different. So, it doesn't, none of this means it's the same. In fact, most of the time it's different or diverse. So it's going to make the investigation maybe just different as well. And so keep that in mind, as you're talking to everyone, as you're hearing the information, some of that dysfunction or some of that uncomfortableness might be expected.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that you can do to make yourself comfortable is ask the open-ended question about how do you onboard new directors? And make it a very simple question. And if people stare at you, like they don't know, what is, you really onboard directors? Don't you just do that for like lower level people in the organization? But if it's somebody hasn't been a board member before, the onboarding process is really important, and assigning someone informally to mentor them through the first year is also really important. And on 2 boards where we really do that well, and I'm on 2 boards where we haven't done it at all. And I just think people get up to speed and contribute faster if there is that kind of process. So it's just another question you might want to think about as you're considering a board seat.
It's a very important one, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, so, the system works really well. So when you're looking, when you're onboarding, and we recommend it to, because when we place someone, we follow them, and we are part of that onboarding process. And so to Arlene's point, most of our boards, because this might be their first independent, sort of say, like, what do you mean, right? Like, they attend their first board meeting. And so, then we talk about, unwinding some of that and connecting them with you know, a buddy of sorts to acclimate them to the traditions that exist and the traditions that will exist going forward, and the impact that this person, you know, will have, and sort of how it's played out to date and what the expectations might be for this new person and their contributions and how to get along.
And just like on an executive team, Arlene, don't you think that the mentoring is really important for the new person on the board to understand the dynamics and the power and the influencers that are on the board, right?
Exactly.
Very important.
So we're just about at time. And I want to be mindful of everyone's time. This has been, I mean, we could speak for hours on this. It's such an interesting topic and so timely in the Southeast. Tara, you brought this up kind of to ask Arlene and to kind of share that thoughts, but I'd be interested in all of your experiences and insights. So I'm going to make the assumption that in the Southeast in particular, there's going to be a lot of first woman, first minority on these boards as the industry evolves and grows. What challenges should I anticipate, and what advice do you have for those who are going to be the first woman, the first minority on a corporate board?
Well, to me, it's no different than being well. We're going to have those challenges, right? In the Southeast or in the Northeast or in California, if you're first whatever on the board. But I think when you're the first on the board, listening is the key. You have to be a listener on your first board. You have to be a listener, period, and saying very little to become a trusted advisor, not spouting off. I mean, there's a lot of people who've been on the board before you. And I think to build those relationships, to build credibility, listening is going to be the #1 skill.
And building a good relationship with the CEO too, I think is also very important, because you can, I mean, usually they're a board member and they can be extremely influential in what even gets discussed at a board meeting. So building that relationship's very important.
And the idea that we would bring to that is it might be your first, but it's not the first time somebody's done that. And so to Arlene's point, prior to your first board meeting, have a one-to-one with everyone on the board and the CEO or other people or management players who are on the board prior to the first board meeting. So sort of get to know your classmates before the first day of school. And then the other thing that you can think about is to contact other women or other minorities or underrepresented folks of any kind, people of color or Latinx, who were also the first at doing something, and tap into some of their best practices or lessons learned so that you can have those in your pre-thinking versus, you know, going into it cold, because your first isn't necessarily the first ever. It's just the first for you. And so tapping into someone who's done it before will help give you that confidence as well.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Well, I want to echo Allison's comment here in the chat on thanking all of you for being so generous with your knowledge and experience and sharing. It really is a wonderful gift to women at Southeast Life Sciences. It's a gift to me. I've learned something new today, and it's been an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. So special thanks to Jason and Allison for keeping me involved.